It was just after 7 on a Tuesday evening when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, spaced with the precision of someone who wanted to be taken seriously. The sun had dipped behind the ridgeline, casting a blue haze over the street. I was still in slacks and a dress shirt, sleeves rolled bourbon, sweating in a low ball on the table beside me. The house was quiet, my kind of quiet. No clients, no courtroom, just my home. The knock came again, this time heavier. I stepped to the door, instinctively checking the side window. A man stood on my porch. Dark tactical-style pants, a blue polo with a gold-embroidered badge stitched just above the heart. He wore wraparound sunglasses, despite the dying light, and a utility belt with a handheld radio clipped to it. His stance was authoritative, legs slightly apart, chest out, like he belonged on a recruitment poster for mall security. He held up a laminated ID that read, HOA Compliance Enforcement Officer, Maple Pines Community Oversight. I opened the door halfway. "Evening," he said with a short nod. "I'm Officer Trent Marshall. We're conducting a compliance sweep for the HOA. Got reports of non-permitted alterations to fencing and potential code infractions on the back deck. I'll need to conduct a property inspection." There was no smile, no neighborly tone, just straight to business. I raised an eyebrow. "You'll need to inspect my property." "Yes, sir." HOA Regulation 14B grants entry for visual verification in cases of repeated or unresolved reports. You can review the notice here. He held out a stapled packet of paper. I didn't take it. Instead, I asked, "Who exactly are you with again?" He shifted. "Maple Pines Community Oversight, a subdivision of Civic Residential Compliance. Not Maple Pines HOA. No, sir. We're contracted through the HOA for compliance actions. External enforcement standard protocol for repeat cases." Repeat cases. I'd never had a violation, never missed a payment, never even got a courtesy letter in my mailbox. I'd lived here quietly for 3 years, bought the house outright in a private sale before the HOA even updated their database. And more importantly, I was a county prosecutor. I knew the law. I also knew HOA compliance officers didn't have jurisdiction to step foot on private property without permission or a court order. But I didn't let on, not yet. "Let me get my shoes," I said casually. "You said fencing issues." He nodded, flipping the packet. "Yes, sir. And we've got neighbor complaints about your deck being enlarged without an approved permit. Satellite images support it. Also noted possible drainage rerouting." I shut the door slowly and walked into the kitchen. My shoes were by the back entrance, but I wasn't going for them. I grabbed my phone and opened the recording app, hit record, and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Then I turned on the small security camera mounted just above the doorframe. It wasn't connected to a service, I'd never needed it, but it worked just fine for offline backups. I came back to the front door. "I think I'll pass on the inspection tonight," I said flatly. He stiffened. "Sir, refusal to comply may result in escalation. You don't have a right to enter my property without a warrant. That's the law. Even if you were real." He blinked, just for a second. Then his mouth tightened. "I'm going to need you to sign this refusal of compliance notice, Mr. Garner. This interaction is being documented." I didn't move. "Let me make something clear. I've never received a single HOA violation. I know for a fact they've never contracted enforcement out to Civic Residential Compliance because I've been reviewing local contract records for a zoning case all week." That part was true. I had just finished a civil suit involving improper HOA ordinances, had all the recent filings on my laptop. His expression shifted just a flicker of something unsure. "You're going to hear from our attorney, sir." "No," I said. "You're going to hear from mine." I shut the door. Behind it, I could hear the scrape of boots stepping back, the sharp crackle of a walkie-talkie. Then silence. I waited 5 minutes, then opened the security app and backed up the footage to my cloud storage. I reviewed the badge frame by frame and zoomed in on the tiny printed number beneath his name. It was fake. The ID used a state seal from Missouri 2 states over. The badge itself had the wrong year on it. I felt the old courtroom switch flip in my brain, the one that sorted evidence, tracked tone, and mapped motive. Whoever this guy was, he'd tried to bluff his way onto my property under the cover of HOA enforcement. But what he didn't know, I don't bluff, and I don't bend. By the next morning, I had a plan and a subpoena template already open. By dawn, I was already on the move. The coffee in my thermos went untouched as I sat in my home office toggling between databases, reviewing county filings, contract registries, and HOA public disclosures. The man who called himself Officer Trent Marshall had no professional footprint in law enforcement, no certification, no registration, nothing. He was a ghost, but ghosts leave shadows. I ran the name Civic Residential Compliance. It sounded official enough to fool someone who wasn't trained to dig, but to me, it screamed facade. The first red flag, no legal business license in the state. The second, their listed website was hosted on a free platform with a contact form that led nowhere. I traced the domain registry. It had been created just 3 months earlier using a proxy server to hide the owner's identity. Amateur. I cross-referenced the address listed on their fake infraction packet. It belonged to a defunct printing shop in the industrial park, vacant for over a year. I felt something in my chest tighten, not with fear, but with resolve. This wasn't just a bluff. This was a manufactured intimidation operation. The implications were bigger than one rogue actor. Someone had the time, money, and motive to fabricate not just an identity, but a whole shell operation, just to coerce homeowners into letting them in. But why? I made my next move. Strategic. I drafted a formal inquiry and emailed it directly to Maple Pines HOA, CCing the community board president, the HOA attorney of record, and the management company. My language was deliberately measured but firm. As a resident and as an officer of the court, I'm requesting immediate clarification regarding any contract, memorandum of understanding, or third-party agreement with Civic Residential Compliance, as well as the authority of any individual operating under the name Trent Marshall to act on behalf of the HOA. If such documentation exists, I ask for it to be delivered to me within 48 hours. If it does not, I will proceed accordingly with a legal request for injunction and an investigation into impersonation, fraud, and trespass. Within 2 hours, I had a reply from the HOA's attorney, short, nervous, and exactly what I'd hoped for. We are not aware of any formal relationship with Civic Residential Compliance or any individual by that name. We take these allegations seriously and are looking into the matter. Translation: they were blindsided. That confirms something critical. If this wasn't sanctioned by the HOA leadership, then someone was going rogue under the name of authority. And if it was partially sanctioned, say, by a single board member acting outside their bounds, then I was sitting on something explosive. That afternoon, I went door to door, not as a prosecutor, just as a neighbor. Most folks were polite, curious. A few were cautious. But the moment I mentioned the words fake compliance officer, the responses got sharper, more visceral. Mrs. Levine, a widow in her 70s, whispered that a man matching that description had come by her house 3 weeks earlier, threatening fines for a gutter that had been installed before she moved in. He said she'd need to sign a waiver to avoid escalation. She hadn't, thank God, but she'd felt frightened for days. Then there was the Chen family, new homeowners with 2 toddlers. They'd gotten a pink slip on their door with Civic Residential's letterhead, claiming their playhouse was a potential sightline obstruction. When they called the number, no one answered. 7 homes in total had been visited. All of them had some minor code infraction cited. All had been left with fraudulent documentation. I photographed the notices, logged the dates, scanned the QR codes, many of which redirected to blank forms or expired sites. It was a web of intimidation, designed to look real enough to pass first glance. But to someone who knew where to look, it unraveled fast. By nightfall, I had a digital file, 43 pages long, complete with transcripts, images, video, and legal commentary. But I needed one more piece. So I went back to my security footage. Frame by frame, I tracked the man's arrival. He came alone on foot. No HOA car, no branded vehicle. But as he turned to leave, I caught something golden in the top right corner of the image. A parked pickup truck partially obscured by my hedges. I enhanced the frame-adjusted contrast and zoomed in. The license plate was just visible. Bingo! I ran it through the DMV system with my county credentials. It was registered to a man named Trent D. Marshland. No law enforcement background, no contractor's license, but what caught my attention was his address. It was listed just outside the HOA's boundaries, in a cul-de-sac historically owned by the same developer who founded Maple Pines. Even more curious, his listed occupation was property management consultant. I kept digging. Turns out Trent had formed a small LLC 3 years prior, Enforce Right Solutions, a dormant corporation with no employees, dissolved after 1 year. but it matched the name on one of the digital forms I'd scanned from the Chen family's fake violation. Suddenly, a picture formed. Trent wasn't a random scammer. He was someone with connections, possibly a failed contractor or manager, now freelancing authority, where none existed. And maybe, just maybe, someone from inside the HOA had given him enough internal language to sound legitimate. I called Claire my friend confidant and one hell of a real estate attorney. She picked up on the second ring. I've got a guy impersonating HOA authority, handing out fake notices, possibly with someone on the board feeding him info, I said. I need your help. There was a pause. Then her voice sharpened, bring everything. We're going to file 2 cases, civil harassment and injunctive relief. And if the board's involved, we add conspiracy and fraud. The game was on. Claire met me the next morning at her downtown office, a clean glass front suite nestled between a yoga studio and a title company. She looked like she'd been up since dawn, already in litigation mode, with her hair pulled back and a yellow legal pad packed with notes. As I spread out the file screenshots and evidence across her conference table, I could see the look in her eyes go from curious to furious. Let me get this straight, she said. You've got a man pretending to be an HOA compliance officer issuing fake violations, and he's not even a resident of the neighborhood. I nodded. And he's using HOA lingo and internal references that you'd only know if someone on the board fed them to you. We're not talking about a random grifter. This guy's operation is precise, and it's built on access. Claire flipped through one of the notices. This language, Section 14B. Property line reassessment permits. These don't even exist in your bylaws. That's what I thought. But they sound just real enough to scare someone who's never read them. She tapped her pen. So what's our first move? Public pressure, legal pressure, and a warning shot across the bow. I stood and paced the room. We're going to expose the fraud, file a petition for a cease and desist, and put the HOA on notice that if anyone within the board is coordinating with him, we'll name them individually in a civil suit. Then I'll bring the evidence to the DA's office for potential charges. Claire smiled. You always did know how to start a fire. By that afternoon, Claire had drafted the initial complaint, petition for injunction and emergency relief naming Civic Residential Compliance, and John Doe, aka Trent Marshall. Attached were sworn affidavits from 4 neighbors, screenshots of all fake violations, and the vehicle registration data from the security footage. But that was just the beginning. We also submitted a public disclosure request to the HOA board, demanding the minutes of their last 12 meetings, any and all third-party vendor contracts, and email correspondence between board members, and any individual named Trent. We gave them 72 hours. What happened next changed everything. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The transcript read, "This is not your fight. Walk away. You're not a hero, you're just another homeowner. If you keep pushing this, you'll regret it." I saved the audio, ran a trace, spoofed untraceable, but not unexpected. I'd rattled the right cage. The next day, the HOA president, Marilyn Kessler, sent out an urgent community update email to all residents. It read like a nervous PR release. We've become aware of an individual falsely claiming to represent our HOA and conducting unauthorized inspections. We want to assure all homeowners that we are investigating the matter. Please direct any concerns to the board. What they didn't expect was my response. I walked straight into the next HOA board meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a brick-sided building that used to be a sales office back when the neighborhood was still under construction. Now, it doubled as a power hub for a small group of clipboard dictators who preferred quiet authority. The room was half full, mostly older residents, curious and concerned. I walked in wearing my work suit, briefcase in hand, and nodded politely to the rows of chairs. Marilyn sat at the center of the board's table, flanked by 4 members. She gave a tight smile as I approached. "Mr. Garner, we weren't expecting you to speak tonight." I interrupted gently. "I won't take much time." I handed her a folder containing the legal petition, the cease and desist notice, and a cover letter addressed to all board members. This, I said loud enough for the entire room to hear, is a formal complaint regarding unlawful impersonation of HOA authority on Maple Pines properties. This man, I clicked a slide on my laptop, projecting Trent's face onto the wall, approached me and several neighbors under false pretenses. He has no authority, no contract, and no credentials. Murmurs filled the room. I continued. We've also filed a request for all communications and board activity that may connect any board member to this individual or his fake operation. If it turns out someone on this board authorized or even knew about his actions, they will be held accountable. Personally, Marilyn's face drained of color. One of the board members, a wiry man named Vince, spoke up. We never approved anything like this. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Someone in the crowd shouted, then how did he know about the complaint I filed about the broken fence last month? I turned to the audience. Exactly. These fake officers knew specific details that weren't public. And if they were leaked from this board, that's not just unethical, it's criminal. The room buzzed. I lowered my voice. You work for the homeowners, not above them. The meeting was officially adjourned in chaos. As people spilled out onto the sidewalk, I saw neighbors shaking hands, exchanging numbers, connecting. For the first time, they weren't just residents, they were allies. And behind the clubhouse, I spotted Claire speaking quietly with a woman I didn't recognize. She wore a name badge that had once said, Recording Secretary. Her eyes flicked to mine, cautious but determined. Claire walked over and whispered, she wants to talk. Says she has documents, emails, and a flash drive. I felt my pulse quicken. The kind of documents, I asked. Claire nodded. The kind that proved someone inside the HOA brought Trent in and paid him off the books. That was it. The leverage we needed. The flash drive sat on my desk like a live wire. I hadn't even opened it yet, but my gut told me it would crack this entire thing wide open. Claire and I met again the next morning, this time in my home office. We sipped black coffee while I ran virus scans and opened the file tree. The folders were cleanly organized. Emails, invoices, meeting audio, photos. Whoever had compiled this wasn't just saving evidence, they were building a case. She said her name was Dana Whitmore. Claire reminded me, scrolling through her notes. Recording secretary for the HOA for the past 4 years. She's stepping down this month, but she said she couldn't live with what they were doing anymore. I opened the emails folder and clicked the first thread. It was from Marilyn Kessler to a private email labeled MP Residential Tasks at ProtonMail.com. The subject line read, Compliance strategy, do not share. The content chilled me. Still no official contract, which is good. We don't want paper trails. Just make sure Trent keeps the script tight. Focus on repeat violations, especially new homeowners and those who don't attend meetings. Push them into signing access waivers. Nobody reads them anyway. The timestamp was from 5 months ago. I looked at Claire. They orchestrated it every step. We kept reading. Dozens of threads showed a pattern. Marilyn and Vince, the wiry board member who had claimed ignorance, had looped in Trent as a sort of black ops enforcer, sending him after homeowners who had challenged fees, requested expense audits, or even voted against board proposals. The most damning email was titled, RE Fence Lady Won't Back Down. Marilyn had written, she's a problem. I don't care if she's got the deed. Make something up about setback lines or water drainage. Just scare her enough to stop sending letters. We'll reimburse T under the table. Attached was a scanned receipt for $800 paid to T. Marshland, property services, dated 2 weeks before my encounter. Claire leaned back. They paid him, off the books, for harassment. It's civil conspiracy, I muttered. And it might even cross into racketeering. They built a system to manipulate property values, intimidate homeowners, and silence dissent, all under the illusion of neighborhood order. Then I clicked into the meeting audio folder. Dana had recorded everything. Board meetings, phone calls, one-on-one conversations between Marilyn and Trent in the clubhouse after hours. We listened to one file, Marilyn's voice hushed but furious. He won't be a problem. If he wants to bring legal heat, let him. He's just a damn lawyer. He'll fold when he realizes we can bury him in complaints. If not, Trent will drop something on his deck overnight. Anonymous report. Done. Claire paused the audio. That's intimidation and tampering. I want that transcribed and logged. I nodded. We'll also file a restraining order. Now it's personal. But before we could do anything more, my phone buzzed. A call from the district attorney's office, my boss, Harold Bruckner. I picked up. Garner, he said, voice low and serious. I just got word that someone impersonating an HOA officer filed a report against you this morning, accused you of trespassing, harassment, and abuse of authority. I blinked. On my own property, apparently. And there's more. A packet with your name and photo was dropped anonymously at the courthouse, claiming misconduct. My chest tightened. It was retaliation. I explained the situation in broad terms, but Bruckner already knew the basics. "Garner," he said, after a long pause, "you're too close to this. I'm pulling you off active case duty until this is resolved. Take some personal leave. Do what you need to do. But make damn sure everything you touch is clean." "I understand." He hung up. Claire looked at me. "They tried to bury you with a fake misconduct claim." I nodded slowly, and it might have worked if I didn't have every receipt. The next move had to be big, so we filed 3 actions that afternoon. An injunction against civic residential compliance, naming Trent Marshland and demanding they cease all activity in our community. A restraining order protecting me, the Chen family, and Mrs. Levine from direct contact. A formal referral to the State Attorney General's office for an investigation into HOA corruption and misuse of funds. That evening, we called a town hall. We reserved the local elementary school cafeteria and sent digital invitations to every homeowner in Maple Pines. The response was overwhelming. More than 80 families showed up. Parents brought kids, retirees came in walkers, and a few folks even wore t-shirts that said, "HOA, you'll hush our anger." I stood at the podium and laid it all out. The emails, the fake officer, the audio, the coordinated fraud. Claire read from the transcripts. Dana was there to confirm every word. And I finished by showing a 60-second clip of Trent trying to bully me on camera. The silence was electric. Then someone stood up and clapped. Another joined in. Soon the entire room was on its feet, a chorus of applause. Not for me, but for truth finally spoken. Marilyn and Vince didn't show, but the next day they would have no choice. By sunrise the next morning, our neighborhood wasn't the same. The story from last night's town hall had already spread beyond Maple Pines. Someone had posted the video of my speech, along with Trent's recorded confrontation, onto a local community forum. By 9 a.m., it had over 12,000 views. By noon, it was on Reddit. By dinner, it was on the front page of the regional newspaper's online edition. Fake HOA officer threatens homeowner, turns out he's a prosecutor. Suddenly, I wasn't just a neighbor fighting back. I was a symbol. But I never wanted the spotlight, I wanted the truth. And more importantly, I wanted to make sure no one else was being hurt by the same scheme. So Claire and I opened a secure email for residents in HOA-managed neighborhoods across the county. We called it HOA Watch Report at protonmail.com. Simple, anonymous, safe. Within 48 hours, we had dozens of emails. A woman named Sandra Perez from a neighborhood just 2 miles away said a compliance officer had threatened to report her for housing her elderly father in a garage unit. Another man, Ben Wu, had paid $400 in fines for a non-regulation fence after being visited by someone named Trent. Same fake badge, same threats, same scam. But Ben's case had a twist. He paid the fine via check, and we had a copy. It was made out to CR Services, the same shell company Claire had already flagged, as tied to Trent's defunct LLC Enforce Right Solutions. That gave us financial proof. Now we could tie Trent to monetary fraud across multiple communities, not just ours. And it got even deeper. A retired couple from Willow Glen, HOA, about 15 minutes north, reached out next. They said their garden renovation was halted by a civic compliance officer claiming it violated neighborhood water aesthetic restrictions. Claire laughed when she read that email. That's not even a real regulation. He just strung fancy words together. But here's what made this one different. They had security footage. We watched it in slow motion. There he was, Trent in the same cheap khakis, clipboard in hand, issuing warnings and waving a laminated badge. But this time, the badge slipped. For 2 frames, we could see the plastic a recycled ID card with a sticker over the name. We froze the image, zoomed in, brightened. The sticker was peeling. Underneath it, faint but legible, was the faded text, Access Control Visitor Pass, Pine Ridge Mall. Claire nearly fell out of her chair. He made his own badge from a mall security visitor card. I stared at the screen. Now we have impersonation mail fraud, extortion unauthorized surveillance, and cross-jurisdictional fraud. We compiled the reports from all victims, mapped them, and noticed a pattern. Every single target was either elderly, non-native English speakers, single parents, or families who had filed formal complaints against their HOAs. They'd been cherry-picked for vulnerability. And Trent, he was the hammer. Marilyn and Vince were the ones wielding him. But the hammer had cracks now. One of the most gut-wrenching emails we received came from a woman named Rhonda Collins. Her voice trembled even in her typing. He came while my son was at home alone. He said he was there for a safety inspection. My son's 14. He let him in. Trent walked through my backyard, took pictures, and told my boy he better tell his mom to fix the gutter or we'll be back. I had no idea until 2 days later. Claire read the message twice. He entered the property, while a minor was home alone. Yes, I said quietly, and he threatened a child. We escalated immediately. Filed a criminal complaint with the local sheriff. Attached Rhonda's affidavit. Included the video clips and emails from our database. Within 72 hours, a warrant for Trent Marshland's arrest was issued on charges of criminal impersonation, unlawful entry, child endangerment, fraudulent solicitation, harassment. It wasn't just a community issue anymore. It was a criminal case, and it set off a domino effect. News crews showed up at Maple Pines. I didn't speak on camera, but Claire did. She was careful, precise with her words. We're not fighting against HOAs, she said. We're fighting against corruption within them, against abuse disguised as compliance. That line went viral. The day after the arrest warrant was issued, Trent fled the county. But he couldn't hide. He was picked up at his gas station in Arizona 4 days later, trying to drive west in a rental van filled with boxes labeled office records. Inside, dozens of fake notices, blank forms, 6 fake badges, 3 burner phones, and a folder marked MPHOA Quiet Contacts. Inside that folder, printouts of emails from Marilyn and Vince. The case was airtight. But just when we thought we had them cornered, something happened that shook me more than anything so far. My front window shattered at 2:14 a.m. A rock had been hurled through the glass. Taped to it was a note. Next time, it won't be just glass. Police came, filed a report. The note had no fingerprints. No DNA. No surveillance caught the thrower, but I knew who it came from. We were winning, and that made someone very, very afraid. I stood in the darkness of my living room, glass shards crunching under my feet, and felt something unexpected. Not fear. Purpose. I wasn't backing down. The morning after the window was smashed, I boarded it up myself. No contractors. No calls to insurance. Just me, a few planks from the garage, and a drill. It wasn't about saving money. It was about reclaiming a sense of control. I wouldn't let them think they'd scared me. And as I drove the last screw into the frame, I made a silent vow. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to make sure they could never do it again. By now, Claire and I had compiled over 40 individual accounts from across the region, each one with details tying the harassment directly to either Trent or someone inside the Maple Pines HOA board. It was bigger than we'd ever anticipated. We weren't dealing with isolated missteps or one bad apple. We were looking at a system of intimidation, exploitation, and silencing. We scheduled a meeting with the State Attorney General's Special Investigations Unit. It was held in a secured building downtown. Neutral walls, no logos. Just 2 agents, Agent Dana Kim and Agent Mark Holloway, listening intently as Claire and I laid everything out over 2 hours. Emails, video, affidavits, the fake notices, Trent's forged badges, the retaliatory vandalism. When I showed them the redacted contract linking Trent's shell company to the HOA's non-disclosed maintenance services, Agent Kim raised an eyebrow. Do you know what this looks like? I nodded. RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. A statute originally designed to prosecute organized crime. Agent Holloway scribbled furiously in his notebook. You've got conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, possibly money laundering through the shell accounts. The quiet contacts folder from the van that seals it. They told us the next steps: sealed subpoenas, a financial audit, a full freeze on HOA discretionary accounts pending the outcome of the investigation. Then Agent Kim turned to me. We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Garner, but we also need you to be careful. When systems like this start to unravel, they don't go quietly. She was right, because just 48 hours later, Marilyn and Vince tried to go down swinging. They held a closed emergency meeting of the board and issued a memo to all Maple Pines residents stating that I, Aaron Garner, was a disgruntled homeowner engaging in smear tactics and that my false accusations were under criminal review. It was a last-ditch smear campaign, but they underestimated one thing: the people they'd abused. That same night, my neighbors responded with a petition of no confidence gathering over 120 signatures within 36 hours. They demanded a full board recall and called for an emergency election. Claire drafted the legal cover for the petition, ensuring it met all state HOA governance laws. And when Marilyn tried to throw the signatures out on a technicality, the county clerk stepped in, confirming the recall was valid. The date was set November 14th, a vote that would decide the future of Maple Pines. In the meantime, I received a call from Rhonda, the mother whose child had been threatened by Trent. "They're watching us again," she whispered. Her Ring camera had caught a black SUV parked near her driveway for over an hour. Claire and I didn't waste a moment. We hired a licensed investigator, someone she trusted to patrol our streets in an unmarked sedan and report suspicious activity. We called in every favor we had filed, every protective motion we could, because now we were dealing with something bigger than HOA misconduct. We were exposing a network of control, and someone out there was desperate to keep it alive. 2 weeks before the recall vote, we received the final piece of the puzzle. It was an anonymous drop, no return address. Just a manila envelope slid under Claire's office door. Inside were scanned bank statements. It showed that the HOA's beautification fund, a discretionary budget for flower signage, and community events had been drained over the past 8 months. Nearly $48,000 had been withdrawn in small checks and ACH payments. Half of them were made out to names linked to Trent's previous business aliases. The rest went to a consulting firm in Orlando, which didn't exist beyond a single P.O. box. We traced that P.O. box. It belonged to Marilyn's cousin, who had filed it under the name Community Care Advisors 6 months prior. Fraud, laundering, kickbacks. Claire looked up from the documents, her face pale but resolute. "We're not dealing with an HOA anymore," she said. "We're dealing with an organized racket using HOA status to enrich themselves, and they've been using residents as pawns." I nodded slowly. Not for much longer. We made our final filing that afternoon, a class action lawsuit on behalf of 18 named homeowners, a civil RICO complaint submitted to the U.S. District Court, a formal motion to suspend all board member powers until the recall vote. Local media ran the headline the next day. Prosecutor leads residents in fight against HOA corruption scheme. And just like that, it was no longer our private battle. It was a movement. And it had teeth. The morning of the hearing, Maple Pines felt like a town preparing for battle. Every driveway had cars parked tight. Every mailbox bore a flyer calling for reform. Every porch light that flickered felt like a beacon, not of warning, but of awakening. Claire and I arrived at the county courthouse early, walking past news vans and camera crews lining the sidewalk. For once, I wasn't the one holding the microphone. I was holding the truth. The courtroom was standing room only. Residents from our neighborhood and several others packed into the gallery, murmuring anxiously as the judge took the bench. Our case was filed under Emergency Civil Motion Garner et al. v. Maple Pines HOA Board. The motion requested an immediate injunction against the current board members pending a criminal investigation and recall vote. The defense table was sparsely populated. Marilyn Kessler sat stone-faced, wearing a business suit 2 sizes too sharp for the mess she'd created. Vince sat beside her, hunched like a collapsing deck chair. No lawyer accompanied them, only a clipboard-holding representative from their property management firm who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Marlowe, a tall woman with silver hair and a reputation for no-nonsense decisions, adjusted her glasses and addressed the room. "I understand we have multiple filings motions and a growing audience. Let's begin with clarity." Claire stood and delivered opening remarks. In just 6 minutes, she outlined the case, the fake compliance officers, the unauthorized fines, the impersonation, the threats, the retaliation. She brought receipts, and when the judge asked for supporting evidence, Claire produced color-coded binders, one for each exhibit. I watched Marilyn squirm as a still photo of Trent's mall badge was displayed on the court projector. I saw Vince flinch when audio played of him chuckling about scaring the foreigners into paying double. Then I took the stand. I testified under oath about my own encounter. I told the court about the forged notice, the confrontation on my porch, the man who called himself an HOA officer, and how within days, retaliation arrived in the form of false accusations, vandalism, and harassment. I am not just a prosecutor, I told the court. I'm a homeowner, a neighbor. And what happened here isn't just a violation of policy, it's a violation of trust. The judge asked a few pointed questions. Claire answered everyone, citing statute after statute, quietly, firmly, unshakably. When it was the defense's turn, Marilyn stood. No lawyer, no prepared remarks, just her. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said. "The compliance officer was a contractor. We believed he was certified. These people, she gestured toward the gallery, are upset about things that don't concern them. Gasps erupted from the back rows. Marilyn quickly added that are being taken out of context. Judge Marlowe raised a hand. Ms. Kessler, are you aware that your contractor has been arrested for impersonating an officer criminal, trespassing, and harassment? Marilyn paused. Her lips trembled. I hadn't seen the paperwork. Claire stood. Your Honor, we request a temporary restraining order against all current board members from engaging in any HOA operations, communications, or financial decisions, effective immediately. Judge Marlowe nodded. Granted. The room exhaled. And just like that, the reign of Marilyn Kessler and Vince Halperin was over. But we weren't done. 2 days later, the recall vote was held. Lines wrapped around the community clubhouse as residents filed in to cast their ballots. Older couples, young families, veterans, renters, owners, people who had never spoken at board meetings before now stood in groups trading stories. I got a fine for a fake violation. They threatened to tow my car. They said I owed dues from before I moved in. By the end of the day, the result was overwhelming. 141 to us. 8. The board was dissolved. A temporary committee was put in place to manage affairs until a proper election could be organized with oversight from the county. That night, we celebrated in Claire's backyard. No cameras, no speeches. Just neighbors laughing, sharing food, sitting under string lights and stars. It felt like the community we'd all wanted from the beginning. A place not ruled by fear or silence, but by care, transparency, and mutual respect. Later that week, I received a letter. It was from the State Attorney General. They were launching a full-scale investigation into HOA corruption across the region, using our case as precedent. The story had inspired other communities to step forward. Similar complaints were flooding in from 5 counties. And as the legal process played out, indictments, depositions, asset freezes, I found myself reflecting not on what we'd lost, but on what we'd reclaimed. Our voices, our power, our homes, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of peace. The indictments came faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks of the court's ruling and the board's official removal, the State Attorney General's office issued a formal press release. A coordinated investigation has uncovered systemic fraud and abuse within multiple HOA organizations operating in the state. Arrest warrants have been issued for 5 individuals, including former Maple Pines board members and their contracted enforcers. The names were public now. Marilyn Kessler, Vince Halperin, Trent Marshland, and 2 others individuals Claire and I had suspected but lacked proof against Allison Spear, the HOA's longtime treasurer, and Gordon Fellows, a local real estate broker who had quietly profited from forced foreclosures. The charges ranged from racketeering and fraud to conspiracy elder intimidation, wire fraud, and impersonation of a public official. Marilyn was arrested in her driveway. A neighbor filmed it and posted it online, Marilyn in heels and pearls screaming into her phone, while 2 plainclothes officers calmly placed her in cuffs. It went viral within hours. The caption read, "HOA Queen finally faces the music." Vince turned himself in the next day, escorted by a lawyer with no media presence. No apology, no statement, just silence. Trent, already in custody in Arizona, was extradited back to the state and placed in protective custody after claiming he had been just a pawn in a larger game. It didn't earn him sympathy, but it did trigger something bigger. Because what he gave investigators next changed everything. Through his plea agreement, Trent handed over a detailed ledger, dates, payments, instructions, proving a coordinated HOA exploitation ring involving over 10 neighborhoods in 3 counties. The racket had targeted elderly homeowners, immigrants, and financially vulnerable families, issuing fraudulent violations to pressure them into issuing or selling quickly. And behind it all, a consulting group masked as a compliance services firm, billing HOAs for inspection reports that were entirely fabricated. The moment this hit the press, I started getting phone calls from attorneys, journalists, whistleblowers, and even state representatives. One call stuck with me. "Mr. Garner," a senator said, "on the other end, you've just exposed something we've suspected for years. We want you to testify before the Joint Housing Oversight Committee." I paused. As a prosecutor or as a homeowner? Both, he replied, but mostly as the man who didn't back down. In the meantime, life in Maple Pines began to change. Without the HOA board, things didn't collapse, they breathed. People began volunteering for community maintenance. One retired neighbor mowed the public walkways. Another repainted the benches. A teen set up a Saturday cleanup crew. The community didn't fall apart, it came together. Claire and I formed a volunteer transition team helping coordinate with the county until a fair election could be held. We created a digital archive of the case for public use, including templates for complaints, records, requests, and advice on how to challenge HOA overreach legally. The site was called hofreedom.org. Its motto, your home, your voice. In its first week, it had over 180,000 hits. Still amid the progress, danger lingered. One evening, I returned home to find a dead bird nailed to my mailbox. No note, no witnesses. Just a silent, gruesome warning. I reported it. Investigators suspected someone connected to Gordon Fellows who hadn't been arrested yet, but no charges stuck. I reinforced my cameras, added motion lights, and met with a personal security consultant. Claire said nothing that night, but she didn't sleep. The next morning, she looked at me across her coffee cup and said, "Promise me something. Anything. Whatever happens next, we don't let this consume us." I nodded. Because the truth was, I had started to lose sight of where this all began, not with courtrooms or subpoenas, but with a knock on my door and a stranger claiming control over my life. And I had answered not with fear, but with resolve. Now I was being asked to carry that resolve forward. Testifying before the state committee was surreal. I stood in front of a panel of elected officials with news cameras blinking silently in the back row. I told them everything from the false violations to the legal battles, the threats, the broken windows, the dead bird. But I also told them this: homeowners associations can be valuable. They can protect property values, mediate disputes, preserve a neighborhood's charm. But when unchecked, when controlled by fear, secrecy, and fraud, they become the very thing they're supposed to prevent. The villain behind the picket fence. The room was silent for a long moment. Then came applause, not performative, not theatrical, but genuine. From the audience, from the staffers, even from two committee members who had themselves once been HOA board members. Legislation followed. A bill was introduced, the Homeowner Protection and Transparency Act, requiring full financial disclosure of HOA budgets, public audit trails for all fines and enforcement actions, state certification for HOA officers, a clear appeals process for any violation, and perhaps most importantly, a criminal review board for HOA abuse complaints. The bill passed through committee with unanimous support, and as the headlines shifted from corruption to reform, I began to see what I hadn't dared hope for. Change wasn't just possible, it had begun. One lawn at a time, one neighbor at a time, one voice amplified until it became a chorus. By late spring, my role in Maple Pines had shifted entirely. I was no longer just the guy who'd stood up to the fake HOA cop or the prosecutor who brought down Marilyn and her cronies. I had become something else, something quieter but no less powerful, a steward of trust. A neighbor people turned to when they didn't know where else to go. It started with small things. A couple down the street asked if I could review a lease agreement their landlord wanted them to sign, just to make sure there weren't any hidden clauses. A teenager emailed me a video clip of someone leaving anonymous letters on his grandmother's porch trying to intimidate her into selling. Another neighbor, Ms. Dorsey, a widow in her 70s, brought over a shoebox full of old HOA letters, some of them dating back a decade. "They always made me feel like I didn't belong," she whispered. We sat at my kitchen table with a pot of tea and went through them one by one. Most were bluff, some were technically legal but improperly issued. One, however, was outright fraudulent, a backdated lien demand with no legal basis. Claire helped me file the paperwork to nullify it. Ms. Dorsey cried when she read the letter of release. "You helped me breathe again," she said. That was the moment I realized. The fight wasn't over, it had simply changed shape. The HOA was gone, yes. The board dissolved. But the scars they left, the fear, the confusion, the silence, they remained in the corners of people's lives like mold in forgotten drywall. So we did something about it. Claire and I converted the garage behind her office into a community advocacy hub. Nothing fancy. Just folding chairs, 2 laptops, a scanner, and shelves full of printed guides with titles like Understanding Your Deed, How to Spot a Fake Violation Notice, Standing Up to Harassment, Your Rights Explained. We ran it 3 evenings a week and Saturday mornings. People came in nervous. Most left empowered. One man brought in a cease and desist letter he'd received from a neighboring HOA on letterhead that looked suspiciously like the one Trent used. We ran the font through a metadata reader. Same signature file, another fake operation. We passed it to the state investigators. The web was larger than anyone imagined. But something else began to shift this time. Not in fear, but in culture. People started talking. Not yelling, not gossiping, talking. About bylaws. About rights. About shared values. What they wanted their neighborhood to feel like. Kids chalked up murals in the community park. Neighbors organized potlucks instead of formal HOA meetings. The volunteer lawn crew became a small brigade mowing not just common areas, but the lawns of elderly residents without asking for anything in return. A couple even started a monthly newsletter, The Pines Post. Its tagline, "Truth over tyranny, neighbors over nonsense." I smiled every time I saw a copy in someone's mailbox. Then something I didn't expect happened. A group of homeowners approached me and asked if I'd consider running for mayor of our small municipality. I laughed at first. Me, the guy who used to spend weekends restoring vintage radios in his basement. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Not because I wanted power, but because I understood now more than ever that good governance begins where people live. It begins with clarity, compassion, and standing up when it's uncomfortable. I told them I'd think about it. That night, Claire and I sat on her porch under a blanket. The spring wind carried hints of jasmine from the neighbor's fence. "You know," she said, "if you did it, you'd still have time to restore your radios. You just might get fewer Saturdays." I looked at her. "I don't want to become something I hate." "You won't," she said simply. "You never did." For a while, we didn't speak. Just listened to the creak of branches and the hush of the wind that used to feel like surveillance and now sounded like a lullaby. That same week, the trial against Marilyn and the others began. It wasn't a circus. It was clinical precise, built from evidence Claire and I had gathered with care. The jury heard hours of testimony from homeowners, accountants, legal experts, and even Trent, who, despite his complicity, gave damning evidence about the internal directives he received. Emails, memos, scripts for intimidation. The verdicts were unanimous. Marilyn Kessler guilty on 5 counts, including conspiracy to commit fraud and racketeering. Vince Halperin guilty on 3 counts of fraud and elder intimidation. Allison Spear and Gordon Fellows guilty on wire fraud and aiding in false liens. Trent Marshland sentenced under a reduced plea deal, 3 years with mandatory testimony in all future HOA-related cases. Restitution funds were established. Affected homeowners began to receive letters promising compensation. And in a moment that brought everything full circle, I was called to read the victim impact statement. I stood before the court, looked at the faces of the people who had tried to make me feel powerless in my own home, and said, "You tried to claim my property, my voice, and my peace of mind. But what you didn't count on was that I know the law. And now so do my neighbors. You didn't silence me. You created a movement." That day, the courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Justice had a quieter sound. The echo of a gavel. The shuffle of papers being signed. The collective sigh of a neighborhood finally allowed to exhale. Summer returned to Maple Pines, but this time it wasn't marked by frustration or fear. It was marked by freedom. No more surprise notices taped to doors. No anonymous threats tucked under windshield wipers. No more fake officers with clipboards and smug grins. In their place, laughter, shared meals. Families walking without looking over their shoulders. Claire and I organized a community celebration, not a victory rally, not a press event. Just a potluck under the old maple tree at the park. The same park that just a year ago had hosted HOA meetings no one dared challenge. Now it was alive with music, folding chairs, children racing barefoot in the grass. I stood off to the side, plate in hand, watching as Ms. Dorsey danced with a cane and a smile. The teenager who once emailed me about porch harassment now handed out lemonade. And someone had brought a cake, 3 tiers frosted with green vines and bold blue letters. "We own our homes. We own our voice." It wasn't just symbolic. The legislation we helped inspire, the Homeowner Protection and Transparency Act, was now law in 2 states and under review in 7 more. Cities across the country requested our documentation to investigate their own HOAs. HOAfreedom.org had grown into a national nonprofit with legal clinics and outreach events held monthly. I traveled more, now testifying, consulting, supporting, but I always came home. To Maple Pines, to Claire, to the porch where it all began. One afternoon, as I was replacing the cedar slats on my front steps, a car pulled up. Out stepped a woman I didn't recognize, early 50s, dressed simply holding a manila folder. "Are you Mr. Garner?" she asked. "I am. I'm from Blue Meadow Estates. I think we're next." I set down my drill and nodded toward the porch. "Let's talk." That's what it became. My home, once a target, had become a refuge. A place where stories were told, patterns were exposed, and futures were rebuilt. People came from all over to share what had been done to them, and together we found paths toward healing, justice, and sometimes even reconciliation. Not every story ended with a courtroom. Some ended with apology letters, with community reforms, with rogue board members stepping down peacefully. Not every HOA was corrupt, but many had become lost in power, and now those tides were changing. And in all of this, I changed too. I didn't run for mayor. Instead, I accepted a quieter role, community legal liaison, appointed by the county to review housing disputes, educate neighborhoods, and ensure that the abuses we endured would never repeat. I visited schools to talk about civic responsibility. I helped draft new bylaw templates rooted in fairness and transparency. At home, Claire and I tended the garden she'd once neglected for HOA paperwork. Tomatoes thrived. So did sunflowers. So did we. I think often of the first time I heard that knock, of the man with the fake badge, of the silence that followed, of the rage I swallowed. And then I think of the courtrooms, the neighbors, the movement. What started with a single lie birthed an undeniable truth. When you stand your ground with knowledge, with courage, with purpose, tyranny has no soil to grow in. Not on my lawn, not on anyone's. Our homes are more than property lines. They're the front lines of our dignity, our safety, our peace. I kept the original violation letter, the one Trent left that night, framed it. Not to honor it, but to remember. To remind myself that real change doesn't always come with fanfare or applause. Sometimes it begins with one door that refuses to open, and one homeowner who refuses to be afraid.